Now, these two distinct lines of response to Orthodox secularism are not entirely incompatible. They agree that secularism itself is a sectarian doctrine with its own metaphysical and moral presuppositions and foundations, with its own myths, and one might even argue with its own rituals. If you've been to a secular university, you will know what some of those rituals are. It's a pseudo-religion. Christians can also agree that Orthodox secularism is caught in a dilemma. By defining public reason stringently enough to exclude appeal to natural law principles, secularism will make it impossible for its own proponents to meet its demand for public reasons. This was the fundamental problem with Professor Rawls's philosophy, a problem that he struggled 40 years and more to meet, but could never satisfy, could never defeat his critics on the point. If, on the other hand, it loosens the definition of public reason sufficiently to pass its own test, it will not be able to rule out principles of natural law, natural rights, and natural justice, as in, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, and among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Appeals to the laws of nature and nature's God, as Jefferson wrote in our Declaration of Independence. Now, both religious responses I've outlined here deny that reason vindicates secularist morality. The first, however, denies that reason can identify moral truths and contents itself with the claim that secularism is no more rational than, say, Christian belief. This is sometimes called the fideist position. The second, by contrast, accepts the proposition that reason can and should be used to identify moral truths, including truths of political morality, but claims that Judeo-Christian morality is rationally superior to the morality of Orthodox secularism. As I noted at the beginning, this is my own position. So I reject fideism in favor of what Bishop Cordileone called rightly the natural law view. Now let's take the central issues of life and death. Begin there. If we lay aside all the rhetorical, grandstanding, and obviously fallacious arguments, questions of abortion, infanticide, suicide, and euthanasia, turn on the question of whether bodily life of a human being is intrinsically good, as Judaism and Christianity teach, or merely instrumentally good, as Orthodox secularists believe. If the former, then even the life of an early embryo or a severely physically or mentally handicapped child or a comatose person has value and dignity. Their value and dignity are not to be judged by what they can do or how they feel or how they make us feel or what we judge to be their so-called quality of life. Their value and dignity transcend the instrumental purposes to which their lives can be put. They enjoy a moral inviolability that will be respected and protected in any fully just regime of law. If bodily life is, as Orthodox secularists believe, merely a means to other ends and not an end in itself, then a person who no longer gets what he wants out of life may legitimately make a final exit by suicide. On this understanding of the value of human life, what would be the point of continuing a life that has no real prospects, that I'm unhappy with? I'd just rather turn out the lights. If he's unable to commit suicide under his own power, he is entitled to assisted suicide. If he's not lucid enough to make the decision for himself to avail himself of suicide, then judgment must be substituted for him by the family or by a court to make the right to die, so-called right to die, effective and available to him. Those who take this view would have us believe that apart from revelation, we have no reason to affirm the intrinsic goodness and moral inviolability of human life. But that simply isn't true. In fact, if the secularist proposition that bodily life is merely instrumentally good were true, it would make nonsense of our ordinary experience of our own lives, because that proposition, that bodily life is merely instrumentally good, entails a metaphysical dualism of the person and the body that is rationally untenable. Let me explain that very abstract but extremely important concept. Implicit in the view that human life is merely instrumentally and not intrinsically valuable is a particular understanding of the human person as essentially a non-bodily being, a mind, a consciousness, a spirit, who inhabits a non-personal body. According to this understanding, which contrasts with the Judeo-Christian view of the human person as a dynamic unity of body, mind, and spirit, the person, so-called person, what counts as the person, just is the conscious and desiring self, as distinct from the body, which may exist, as in the case of a pre- or post-conscious human being, as a merely biological and thus sub-personal reality. This is what licenses the view of so many that to kill an embryo or a fetus, or as my colleague Peter Singer claims, a newborn infant, or a comatose person, or a person suffering from Alzheimer's disease, is not really to kill a person. Because while there's a human body there, Professor Singer doesn't deny that the unborn child is a human being. In fact, he slapped down Mario Cuomo for claiming that there's some dispute about when the life of a human being begins. Professor Singer says, we know that the unborn child is a human being. That's not the question. But is he a person? And Professor Singer says no, because he lacks conscious self-awareness. Lacks conscious self-awareness until well after birth. So Professor Singer says there's not anything morally wrong with abortion, but by the same token, nothing morally wrong with infanticide, and nothing morally wrong with killing a person, a human being, who used to be a person, but is no longer a person because he's now suffering from dementia, or is in a coma, or in a minimally conscious state. And of course, nothing wrong with killing a severely mentally disabled person, human being, who's not really a person, because that human being never was, isn't now, and never will be self-aware enough to qualify as a person, a bearer of dignity. But the dualistic view that separates person and body, that imagines that what we are non-bodily persons, consciousnesses, minds, that inhabit non-personal bodies, this dualistic view of the human person makes nonsense of the experience all of us have in our activities of being dynamically unified actors. Of being, that is, embodied persons and not persons who merely inhabit bodies and direct them as extrinsic instruments under our control, like automobiles. We don't sit in the physical body and direct it as an instrument the way we sit in a car and make it go right or make it go left. The car is extrinsic to ourselves. It's an instrument under our control. But our bodies are not like that in relation to our minds. The same body, the same person, the same individual who perceives the pen by physical acts in a physical process understands by a mental act that that is a pen and not an elephant. There is no distinction between person and body. So all human beings are persons. There may be some persons who are not human beings. Christians believe that God is a person, 3 persons, not a human being. That angels are persons, but not human beings. Any creature or any entity, any being possessing a rational nature is a person, although not all have bodies. But the particular type of persons that human beings are bodily persons. The body not being a mere extrinsic instrument, a suit of flesh, but being part of the personal reality of the human being. That's why our bodies matter. That's why our biological lives matter. That's why respect for the dignity of the person means respect for the whole person as a dynamic, unified body, mind, spirit composite. And this experience of unity of body, mind, and spirit is itself no mere illusion. Philosophical arguments have undermined any theory that purports to demonstrate that the human being is in fact 2 distinct realities, a person and a subpersonal body. Any such theory will unavoidably contradict its own starting point, since reflection necessarily begins from one's conscious awareness of oneself as a unitary actor. So the defender of dualism in the end will never be able to identify the I who understands or undertakes the project of reflection. He will simply be unable to settle whether the I is the conscious and desiring aspect of the self or the mere living body. Is it the bodily processes that are perceiving the pen, or is it the mental act by which we judge this to be a pen and not an elephant?